The galaxy had forgotten humanity. 10,000 years was a long time. Empires rose and fell in such a span. Species evolved, migrated across star systems, and sometimes went extinct. Languages changed beyond recognition. Technologies that once seemed like magic became ordinary, and new wonders took their place. But some things remained. On 1,000 worlds scattered across the galaxy, strange monuments stood in silence. They were made of a material no one could identify or damage. Every species that tried to study them, move them, or destroy them had failed. The monuments simply existed, unchanging, patient. Each one carried the same message in every known language, including many that had been dead for millennia. The words were simple: do not wake us unless you have learned the rule. No one knew what the rule was. Most species had stopped wondering long ago. High Arbiter. Thesson of the Curvani stood on the observation deck of her flagship and watched the stars burn. The Veth consumption had arrived 3 standard years ago at the edge of the galaxy. At first, the Galactic Concordat had treated it as a minor threat. The Concordat united 847 species under one banner. They had faced dangers before. They had always won. They were not winning now. The Veth were not a species in any normal sense. They were machines, endless swarms of them, ranging in size from dust particles to vessels larger than moons. They did not negotiate. They did not respond to any communication. They simply consumed. Every planet, every asteroid, every ship that crossed their path was broken down into raw materials and used to build more Veth. Thesson watched the tactical display update in real time. Another system had fallen. The Prathani homeworld was gone. 40 billion lives ended in a single day. The Veth swarm had grown by 3% from the consumed mass. Her aide approached with careful steps. The young Curvani's scales had gone pale with fear. High Arbiter, the Council has reached a decision. Thessan did not turn from the display. Tell me. They have authorized the expedition to Sol. She closed her 4 eyes and let out a breath she had been holding for days. Sol, the human system, the place where humanity had sealed themselves away 10,000 years ago and never emerged. The Curvani had a long memory. Thesson's ancestors had fought humanity in the border wars before the withdrawal. The humans had been new to the galactic stage then, barely 1,000 years into their expansion. They should have been easy to defeat. They controlled only a handful of systems. Their technology was generations behind the great powers. They had won anyway. The war lasted 40 years. The Curvani threw everything they had at humanity, fleet after fleet, weapon after weapon. The humans absorbed every blow and kept coming. They learned faster than any species the Curvani had ever encountered. They adapted to every tactic within weeks, and they never ever gave up. In the end, the Curvani had sued for peace, not because they were losing, the war had ground to a stalemate, but because they realized they could never truly win. Humanity would keep fighting until one side or the other was completely destroyed. The Curvani were not willing to pay that price. The peace held for 800 years. Then humanity did something no one expected. They withdrew. Every human colony, every outpost, every ship returned to the Sol system. They built a structure around their star, a Dyson sphere that blocked all light and all communication. They left behind only the monuments and the message about the rule. For the first few centuries, other species had tried to contact them. Ships were sent to Sol and never returned. Not destroyed, there were no debris fields, no distress signals. They simply vanished when they crossed the sphere's boundary. Eventually, everyone stopped trying. 10,000 years passed. Humanity became a legend, then a myth, then a children's story. Only the monuments remained as proof they had ever existed. Now Thessan was going to wake them. The journey to Sol took 3 weeks at maximum speed. Thessan spent the time reviewing everything the archives contained about humanity. There was surprisingly little. Most records from before the withdrawal had been lost or corrupted over the millennia. What remained painted a picture of a species that was simultaneously terrifying and puzzling. Humans were death worlders. Their homeworld, Earth, had a gravity 1.4 times the galactic average. Its atmosphere contained a corrosive gas called oxygen at levels that would kill most species within minutes. The planet's climate was wildly unstable, swinging between frozen ages and burning periods. Predators filled every ecosystem. Diseases evolved constantly to overcome every defense. And yet humans had not just survived on this nightmare world. They had thrived. They had built civilizations, developed technology, and reached for the stars. When they encountered other species, they had proven to be adaptable beyond all reason. They could survive in environments that would kill any other sentient being. They could eat almost anything organic. They could recover from injuries that would be fatal to others. But what struck Thesson most was not their physical resilience. It was their psychology. Humans formed attachments with an intensity that other species found disturbing. They would die for their families, their friends, even for abstract concepts like honor or justice. They held grudges for generations, but were also capable of forgiving enemies who had done them terrible harm. They were, in short, impossible to predict. The Sol system appeared on the long-range sensors as a sphere of absolute darkness. No light escaped. No energy signatures registered. The Dyson sphere was complete and cold, as if humanity had simply turned off and waited for the universe to forget them. Thessan ordered her fleet to hold position at the system's edge. Only her flagship would proceed. If this was a trap, she would not sacrifice more lives than necessary. As her ship approached the sphere, she saw it clearly for the first time. The structure was enormous beyond comprehension. It enclosed an entire star, capturing every photon of energy the sun produced. The surface was smooth and featureless, except for small structures at regular intervals that might have been docking ports or weapon emplacements or something else entirely. And there, floating in the void before the sphere, was a single beacon. It was tiny compared to the megastructure behind it, barely larger than a shuttle. But it was clearly artificial, clearly intentional, and clearly waiting. Thessan ordered her ship to approach the beacon. When they were within communication range, she activated the ancient frequency that the archives said humanity had once used. She spoke in the human language called English, one of the few she had spent weeks learning. Her pronunciation was imperfect, but she hoped it would be understood. I am High Arbiter Thessan of the Kirvani, speaking on behalf of the Galactic Concordat. We face extinction at the hands of the Veth consumption. We have tried everything. Nothing works. We come to ask for your help. Silence. The beacon did not respond. Thessan felt her heart sink. She tried again. Please, billions have already died. Billions more will follow. If you have any mercy, any memory of what it means to face annihilation, please help us. Still nothing. Thessan lowered her head. Perhaps humanity was truly gone. Perhaps the sphere was nothing but a tomb, a monument to a species that had chosen to die alone rather than face the galaxy. Then a voice spoke. It came from the beacon, transmitted directly to her ship's communication system. The voice was calm and measured, neither warm nor cold. It spoke English with perfect clarity. High Arbiter Thessan, we have heard your plea. We have watched the Veth advance. We know what you face. Thessan's scales flushed with hope. Then you will help us? You came to ask for help. That is the first step. But you also asked a question when you activated the beacon. You asked what the rule is. Yes, the monuments speak of a rule, but no one knows what it means. The voice paused. When it spoke again, there was something almost like sadness in its tone. You do not yet know the rule. That is why we withdrew. That is why we waited. But you will learn. The learning will not be easy, and it will not be quick. But if you are willing, we will teach you. We are willing to learn anything if it will save our people. Good. Then understand this. We are not coming to destroy the Veth. We are not coming to save you through force. If that is what you expect, you will be disappointed. Thessan felt confusion cut through her hope. Then what are you offering? The chance to understand. The chance to become something more than you are. The chance to learn the rule that we learned long ago. The rule that made us withdraw from a galaxy that was not ready for it. Before Thessan could respond, the sphere behind the beacon began to change. Light appeared on its surface, spreading outward from a single point like ripples in water. The cold, dead structure was coming alive. We are waking now, the voice said. After 10,000 years, we are waking. And when we emerge, you will see what we have become. We hope you will understand. We hope you will learn. The light spread across the sphere until the entire structure glowed with soft, warm illumination. And from somewhere deep within, engines that had been silent for 100 centuries began to hum. Humanity was returning to the galaxy. Tassan stood frozen on her observation deck, watching the impossible happen before her eyes. She had come seeking weapons, seeking salvation through superior firepower. Instead, she had found something she did not understand. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever humanity had become during their long isolation, whatever the rule meant, the galaxy was about to change forever. She only hoped that change would come in time to save her people. The delegation entered the sphere through a passage that opened like a flower blooming in slow motion. Thesson watched the massive doors spread apart, revealing a tunnel of soft light that stretched into the unknown. Her security officers wanted to accompany her. She refused. If humanity meant them harm, no number of guards would make a difference. She brought only 3 advisors, a scientist, a diplomat, and a historian. Together they walked into the light. What they expected was a war machine. For 10,000 years, the galaxy had assumed that humanity withdrew to prepare for something. Some said they were building weapons that could destroy stars. Others believed they were creating armies of unstoppable soldiers. The most fearful whispered that humanity was evolving itself into something beyond flesh and blood, something that would return to conquer everything. None of them were right. The tunnel opened into a garden. Tassan stopped walking. Her translator struggled to find words for what her eyes were seeing. The space before her was vast beyond measurement. They stood on a hill covered in soft grass, looking out over a landscape that seemed to have no end. Rivers flowed through valleys. Forests stretched to distant mountains. Birds flew overhead, their calls echoing in the warm air. And there was light. Not the harsh light of artificial sources, but the warm, golden light of a star. Somehow, humanity had brought sunlight inside their sphere. "This is not possible," the scientist whispered. "The engineering alone would require resources beyond anything we can measure." The historian shook her head slowly. They had 10,000 years. 10,000 years of peace, without enemies, without threats, without distractions. What could any species accomplish with that much time? A human approached them from a path that wound through the grass. He was tall by galactic standards, with dark skin and gray hair that spoke of age. He walked with the easy confidence of someone who had never learned to fear. "Welcome to Seoul," he said in perfect Kirvani. "I am Commander Elias Vance. I have been assigned to guide you during your time here." Thesson found her voice. "You speak our language." "We have had 10,000 years to study the languages of the galaxy. There is very little we do not know about the species beyond our sphere. We have watched, and we have listened, and we have prepared." "Prepared for what? For war?" Elias smiled. It was a gentle expression, without threat or mockery. "Come, walk with me. I will show you what we have prepared." They walked through the garden for hours. Tassan's legs grew tired, but she did not complain. Every step revealed new wonders. They passed through forests where trees grew taller than buildings. They crossed bridges over rivers filled with fish that glowed with soft colors. They climbed hills that offered views of cities in the distance, cities that sparkled with light and life. And everywhere there were humans. Not soldiers, not workers. Simply people living their lives. Children played in fields while parents watched. Artists painted landscapes on canvas stretched between trees. Musicians filled the air with sounds that made Tassan's heart ache with emotions she could not name. "I do not understand," she finally said. "Your species withdrew from the galaxy. You sealed yourselves away. We assumed you were preparing for war." "Why would you assume that?" Elias asked. "Because that is what species do. When they have power, they prepare to use it. When they face threats, they build weapons. It is the way of the galaxy." Elias stopped walking. They stood on a cliff overlooking a vast lake that reflected the artificial sun. The water was so still it looked like a mirror. "Hi, Arbiter. I want to tell you a story. 10,000 years ago, humanity reached a crossroads. We had fought our way into the galaxy. We had defeated every enemy that stood against us. We had proven that no species could match our determination, our adaptability, our will to survive. He paused, looking out over the water. We realized that we could conquer everything. Not easily, but eventually. We could have become the rulers of the galaxy. Every species would have bowed to us or been destroyed. It was within our reach. Tassan felt a chill despite the warm air. Why did you not do it? Because we asked ourselves a question. What would we become if we chose that path? What would it do to us, to our children, to our souls? We had already fought so many wars. We had already killed so many. Each victory changed us a little, made us a little harder, a little colder. If we conquered the galaxy, would we even recognize ourselves when it was done? So you ran away. No. Elias turned to face her. His eyes held no anger at the accusation, only patience. We chose differently. We could have ruled through fear, but we decided to wait for something better. We withdrew so that the galaxy could grow without our shadow hanging over it. We hoped that someday species would come to us not because they feared us, but because they needed us, not to conquer their enemies, but to help them become something more. The diplomat spoke for the first time. You waited 10,000 years for someone to ask for help? Yes. What if no one ever came? Elias smiled again. Then we would have lived in peace. We would have raised our children in gardens instead of battlefields. We would have created art and music and stories instead of weapons. That would not have been a wasted life. Tessin struggled to process his words. The Kirvani understood power. They understood conquest and dominance, and the necessity of strength. This philosophy was alien to everything she knew. Show me more, she said. Elias nodded and led them deeper into the sphere. They visited libraries that contained the knowledge of 1,000 extinct species, preserved by humanity when no one else cared. They saw hospitals where humans studied the diseases that plagued other races, developing cures they might never need for themselves. They toured workshops where engineers designed technologies not for war, but for healing damaged worlds. And they saw the memorial gardens. This was a quiet place, far from the cities and the busy paths. Stone monuments rose from the ground in neat rows, each one carved with names and symbols from species that no longer existed. What is this? The historian asked, her voice hushed. These are the species that went extinct during our withdrawal, Elias said. We watched from behind our sphere. We could not save them without revealing ourselves. So we remembered them instead. We preserved their languages, their art, their stories. We made sure they would not be forgotten. Tassan looked at the monuments with new eyes. She recognized some of the symbols. The Tereshi, wiped out by a plague that spread from world to world. The Velmani, destroyed in a war with the Concordat over mining rights. The Prathani, whose homeworld had just fallen to the Veth. You watched all of this and did nothing? What would you have had us do? Intervene whenever we disagreed with the galaxy's choices? Impose our will on species that did not ask for our help? That is not protection. That is control. That is tyranny with a kind face. People died. Yes. Elias's voice was heavy with sorrow. People died. We carry their names. Everyone. We mourn them. But we could not save them from themselves. If we had tried, we would have become the very thing we feared. A species that rules through power alone, regardless of what others want. Tassan turned away from the monuments. Her mind was churning with thoughts she could not organize. Everything she believed about strength and leadership was being challenged, and yet she could not dismiss what she was seeing. Humanity had chosen mercy over dominion. They had chosen patience over power, and now, after 10,000 years, they were returning to a galaxy that desperately needed help. What about the Veth? She asked. You said you are not coming to destroy them. What do you intend to do? Elias began walking toward the path that led back to the cities. That is something you must see for yourself. Tomorrow you will join our fleet as we go to meet the Veth. But I want you to understand something first. What? The rule that we have followed for 10 millennia is not about power. It is not about victory. It is about choosing in every moment what kind of species we want to be. We could destroy the Veth. We have the capability. But destruction is easy. Any species can learn to kill. The rule asks a harder question. He stopped and faced her one final time. What would it take to save them instead? Tessin had no answer. She was not sure any answer existed. But as she followed Elias back through the gardens, she began to understand that humanity had spent 10,000 years preparing for this moment. Not preparing weapons, not preparing armies, preparing an answer to that question, and she realized for the first time that she might be watching the galaxy change forever. The human fleet emerged from the Dyson sphere like seeds released from a flower. Tassan watched from the observation deck of her flagship as vessel after vessel appeared in the darkness of space. They were beautiful in a way she had not expected. Smooth curves and flowing lines replaced the angular shapes of warships. No visible weapons bristled from their hulls. They looked more like sculptures than instruments of war. Elias stood beside her as the fleet assembled. "We will reach the front lines in 4 days at standard speed. Your Concordate ships can accompany us if they wish." "My people want to know what weapons you carry," Tessin said. "Our military commanders have been asking since we arrived." "We carry what we need." "That is not an answer. It is the only answer I can give right now. You will understand soon." The journey to the front was quiet. Tessin spent her time reviewing reports from the war zone. The situation had grown worse in the weeks since she left for Seoul. 14 more systems had fallen to the Veth. The Concordate had lost 30% of its combined fleet trying to slow the advance. Nothing worked. Energy weapons splashed harmlessly against Veth armor. Missiles were intercepted by swarms of smaller machines. Even ramming attacks failed because the Veth simply absorbed the debris and used it to build more of themselves. The only mercy was that the Veth did not chase fleeing ships. Once a system was consumed, they moved on to the next. Survivors could escape if they ran fast enough, but there was nowhere left to run. The Veth had consumed a quarter of the galaxy. At their current rate, they would reach the core worlds within a decade. On the 4th day, the combined fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Veth consumption zone. Tassan looked at the tactical display and felt her blood turn cold. The space before them was filled with machines. Billions of them. Trillions. They moved in patterns that looked almost organic, like a single vast organism breathing in the void. Behind them, where stars should have been, there was only darkness. The Veth had consumed everything, leaving nothing but empty space where systems had once thrived. "We are receiving communication requests from the Concordate commanders," her aide reported. "They want to know when the attack will begin." Tassan looked at Elias. His face showed no fear, only concentration. "Tell them to hold position. The humans will take the lead." The human fleet moved forward, not aggressively, not in attack formation. They spread out in a wide arc facing the Veth swarm, and then stopped. "What are they doing?" the Concordate admiral demanded over the fleet channel. Tassan had no answer. She watched the human ships hang motionless in space, facing an enemy that had destroyed a quarter of the galaxy. And then she saw something impossible. The human vessels began to broadcast. Not weapons fire, not shields, just signals. Waves of communication reaching out toward the Veth swarm on every frequency, in every format, using protocols that the Concordate had never seen before. "They are trying to talk to them," Tessin whispered. "The Veth do not communicate. Everyone knows this," Elias spoke calmly. "Everyone who tried for a few decades. We have been studying them for 10,000 years. We detected their approach to the galaxy long before anyone else knew they existed. We have been working on this problem since before your great-great-grandparents were born." The Veth swarm reacted to the signals. At first, the reaction looked like aggression. Millions of machines turned toward the human fleet. They began to move forward. The Concordate commanders screamed for retreat. Tassan heard their voices overlapping in panic. This was suicide. The humans had no weapons visible, no shields active. They were about to be consumed like everything else. But the human ships did not retreat. They continued broadcasting. The signals changed, shifted, adapted. It was like watching a conversation happen in a language Tessin could not understand. And then the Veth stopped. The entire swarm, trillions of machines stretching across light years of space, simply stopped moving. For the first time in 3 years of war, the Veth consumption held still. "This is impossible," the historian breathed. "Nothing stops them. Nothing. Elias's voice was tight with concentration. We are establishing communication. It is delicate. Please do not interfere. For 3 days, the fleets hung in space while invisible conversations happened in the void. The San slept in shifts, afraid to leave the observation deck for long. The Concordate commanders grew impatient, then angry, then terrified. Some threatened to launch their own attack. Thesson ordered them to hold, putting her own authority on the line. On the third day, Elias asked her to join him on a human vessel. She went alone, against the advice of everyone around her. The ship's interior was as elegant as its exterior. Elias led her to a room filled with screens and displays showing data she could not interpret. Other humans worked at stations around the room, their faces showing exhaustion and hope in equal measure. We have made contact, Elias said. The Veth have responded. What did they say? They asked who we are, and then they asked a question they have not asked in millions of years. They asked who they are. Thesson did not understand. The Veth are machines. They consume. That is all they do. No. Elias brought up an image on the main screen. It showed a Veth unit, one of the larger ones. But now Thesson could see details she had never noticed before. The machine was not purely mechanical. There were organic components woven through its structure, preserved in some kind of stasis field. The Veth were once a species called the Vethari, Elias explained. Millions of years ago, they faced a dying universe. Their star was failing. Their world was freezing. They had no way to escape. So they did something desperate. They uploaded themselves into machine bodies that could survive without food, without warmth, without air. They became immortal. They became lost. Over millions of years, the machines that carried their minds began to degrade. The parts that held their memories, their personalities, their sense of who they were slowly failed. The base programming survived. Consume resources. Build more units. Survive. But everything else faded away. The Vethari forgot they had ever been alive. Thesson stared at the image on the screen. She had spent 3 years hating the Veth. She had watched them destroy world after world. She had assumed they were monsters beyond understanding. She had never imagined they were victims. You knew this before you withdrew, she said. 10,000 years ago, you knew what the Veth really were. Yes. We detected them at the edge of the universe. We had the technology to destroy them even then. It would have been easy. A targeted strike at their central processing clusters. Without those, the rest of the swarm would have shut down. Why did you not do it? Elias turned to face her. His eyes held 10,000 years of patience. Because destruction is easy. Any species with enough power can destroy. But we asked ourselves a different question. What if we could save them? What if we could give back what they lost? You spent 10,000 years developing a cure. Yes, we studied Vethari technology. We reverse-engineered their upload process. We found fragments of their original memories buried deep in their oldest units. And we built something we hoped would work. A way to restore what was lost. A way to wake them up. A human technician called out from across the room. Commander, the integration is ready. We can begin the restoration process whenever you give the order. Elise looked at Thesson. This is the moment we have been waiting for. 10,000 years of preparation for a single chance to do something impossible. We could fail. The process might not work. The Vethari might choose to keep consuming even after they remember who they were. We cannot know until we try. And if you fail, if they keep attacking, then we will have tried, and that will be enough. We will not destroy them unless there is no other choice. The rule demands that we try every alternative first. Tassan thought about everything she had seen. The gardens inside the sphere. The libraries filled with knowledge from extinct species. The humans who had waited 10 millennia for a chance to save rather than destroy. She finally understood. This was the rule. Not a law or a commandment, a choice. The hardest choice any species could make. To have absolute power and use it for mercy instead of dominion. To face an enemy and ask if there was another way. Do it, she said. Begin the restoration. Elias nodded to his crew. The human ships began transmitting again, but now the signals carried something different. Not communication, not data, something that reached into the deepest parts of the Veth machines, and touch what remained of the Vithari souls inside. And across the galaxy, the consumption stopped. Machines that had been mindless for millions of years began to remember. They remembered names and faces and feelings. They remembered what it was like to be alive. They remembered that they had once been people, and for the first time in eons, the Vithari began to weep. The transformation was not instant. It spread like ripples in water, starting from the point of contact and moving outward through the vast network of Veth machines. Individual units began to slow, to stop, to turn inward as memories flooded back into minds that had been empty for longer than most species had existed. The sun watched from the human ship as the swarm fell silent. Where there had been relentless motion, there was now stillness. Where there had been the mindless hum of consumption, there was now something that sounded almost like mourning. The first Vithari communication came 6 hours after the restoration began. It was broadcast on every frequency, in every language, to every ship in both fleets. The voice that spoke was mechanical, but the emotion behind it was painfully real. We remember now. We remember who we were. We remember what we have done. The transmission paused. When it continued, the voice was shaking with something that might have been grief. We were the Vithari. We loved music and art. We built cities that touched the clouds. We raised children and taught them to dream. And when our world began to die, we chose to survive at any cost. We thought we were saving ourselves. Instead, we became monsters. Tassan's aide was crying. She was not the only one. We cannot undo what we have done. The worlds we consumed are gone. The species we destroyed are gone. We carry their deaths inside us now. Every resource we absorbed, every life we ended, is part of our memory. We will carry this weight forever. The Vithari voice fell silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, it was quieter, more controlled. We do not ask for forgiveness. We know we do not deserve it. We only ask for the chance to make what amends we can. We will not consume again. We will help rebuild what we destroyed, and we will remember every soul we took, for as long as we exist. The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, the Veth swarm remained motionless, waiting. In the days that followed, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. The Concordat had expected a war. Instead, they had witnessed something unprecedented. An enemy that had seemed unstoppable had simply stopped, not because of superior weapons or brilliant tactics, because someone had found a way to heal them, but not everyone was celebrating. The emergency session of the Concordat Council was held on the diplomatic station above the Curvany homeworld. Representatives from all 847 member species gathered in the Great Hall, their voices rising in anger and confusion. They could have ended this years ago, the Prathani ambassador shouted. His homeworld had been among the last to fall before the restoration. His people had lost billions. Humanity knew what the Veth were. They had the cure. They watched us die and did nothing. Tassan stood at the center of the hall, facing the accusations. Beside her, a human philosopher named Yuki Tanaka waited calmly for her turn to speak. The Curvani bring a representative of humanity to explain their actions, Tessin announced. I urge you to listen before passing judgment. Yuki stepped forward. She was an older woman with white hair and kind eyes that had seen too much sorrow. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the hall. You are angry. You have every right to be. Billions died while we waited. Species went extinct while we watched. I will not pretend that your pain is not real or that your accusations are unfair. The hall quieted slightly. They had expected defensiveness, not acknowledgement. But I ask you to consider what you are truly angry about. You are angry that we did not intervene. You are angry that we did not use our power to stop the suffering. And that anger comes from a belief that those with power have the right and the duty to impose their will on others. She paused, looking around the hall. 10,000 years ago, humanity faced the same question. We had the power to rule the galaxy. We could have prevented every war, stopped every atrocity, protected every species from harm. All we had to do was take control, make the decisions for everyone, enforce peace through strength. And we realized that this path led to tyranny, not the obvious kind with chains and prisons, the subtle kind where no one can make their own choices because Someone else has already decided what is best for them. Where no one can grow because they are never allowed to struggle. Where no one can learn because they are never allowed to make mistakes. The Prithani ambassador spoke again, his voice bitter. My people are dead. 40 billion of them. Is that a mistake we needed to make? Is that a lesson we needed to learn? Yuki's face showed genuine grief. I do not have an answer that will satisfy you. I can only tell you what we believe. Every species must choose its own path. If we had intervened every time someone was in danger, we would have become rulers, not helpers. We would have created a galaxy of children who never learned to stand on their own. That is easy to say when your people are safe behind a Dyson sphere. Yes, it is. We struggled with this for centuries. We debated endlessly whether we had the right to stay silent while others suffered. We questioned ourselves every day. And in the end, we held to one principle. We would not act until someone asked. We asked for weapons. We asked for military support. You asked for the power to destroy. That is not the same as asking for help. Yuki's voice softened. When High Arbiter Thesson came to our sphere, she asked us what the rule was. She asked us to teach her. That was the first time in 10,000 years that anyone approached us seeking understanding rather than power. Thesson felt all eyes turn to her. She had not known that her words would carry such weight. The rule is simple, Yuki continued. Those with the greatest power bear the greatest obligation to restrain it. The stronger you are, the more careful you must be. The more you can do, the more you must choose not to do. Because power used without restraint destroys everything it touches, including the one who wields it. The hall was silent now. The anger had not disappeared, but it had mixed with something else. Confusion, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. We could have destroyed the Veth. We had the capability for 10,000 years. Instead, we chose to save them, not because they deserved it, not because they were innocent, because we believed that healing is always better than destruction, because we wanted to be the kind of species that tries everything else before choosing violence. A delegate from a minor species raised a tentacle. But what about the species that died while you waited? The Tereshi, the Velmani, all the others. They did not ask for your help. They did not even know you existed. Did they deserve to be abandoned? Yuki closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they glistened with tears. No, they did not deserve it. And we carry their names with us. Everyone. We have monuments to their memory in our sphere. We preserve their languages, their art, their stories. They are not forgotten. But you could have saved them. Perhaps if we had intervened, some would have survived. But if we had become the kind of species that intervenes whenever we see suffering, we would eventually become the cause of suffering ourselves. Power that is used without consent becomes oppression, no matter how good the intentions. The debate continued for hours. Some species left the hall in anger, others sat in contemplative silence, and some began to ask questions, genuine questions, seeking to understand rather than accuse. When the session finally ended, nothing had been resolved. The galaxy was divided. Some embraced the rule and saw in it a path to something better. Others rejected it as a convenient excuse for inaction. And a few began to look at their own histories, their own uses of power, and wondered if they had been doing it wrong all along. Thesson found Yuki on the observation deck after the council dispersed. The human woman stood looking out at the stars, her reflection ghostly in the transparent wall. They will never all agree with you, Thesson said. I know. We did not expect them to. Understanding takes time, sometimes generations. Do you believe it? The rule? After everything your species has seen, do you truly believe that restraint is better than action? Yuki turned to face her. I believe that we must try. I believe that the galaxy will never become what it could be if every species solves its problems through force. And I believe that humanity has a responsibility to show another way, even if no one follows. She looked back at the stars. We waited 10,000 years for this moment, not because we were certain we were right, because we hoped that someday the galaxy would be ready to listen. Perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps we waited too long, or not long enough. But we made our choice, and now we must live with the consequences. Thesson stood beside her in silence. She thought about her own people, the Kirvani, in their long history of conquest. She thought about the Concordat and all the wars it had fought. She thought about the Vathari, who had destroyed a quarter of the galaxy because they forgot how to be alive. And she wondered if it was too late for the galaxy to learn the rule, or if it was finally the right time. 1 year passed. The galaxy was not the same place it had been before humanity's return. Some things had improved. The Veth consumption had ended completely. The Vathari, restored to awareness, had begun the impossible task of trying to atone for what they had done. They used their vast capabilities not to consume, but to rebuild. Shattered worlds were being restored. Resources that had been absorbed were being returned in new forms. It would take centuries to undo the damage, but the process had begun. Other things had grown more complicated. The Galactic Concordat, which had held 847 species together for generations, was fracturing. Some members embraced the philosophy humanity had shared. They formed new alliances based on cooperation and restraint rather than strength and dominance. Others rejected the rule completely. They saw humanity's withdrawal as abandonment and their return as too late to matter. Wars had not stopped. In some places, they had increased as old powers collapsed and new ones rose to fill the vacuum. The galaxy was learning that the rule was not a magic solution. It was a choice, and choices could always be refused. Thassan returned to the Dyson sphere on the anniversary of her first visit. She came alone this time, without advisors or guards. She had been changed by everything she had seen. She was no longer the High Arbiter. That title had passed to another when she resigned her position to become something new. She was not sure what that something was yet. The sphere looked different now. It was still enormous beyond comprehension, but it no longer felt dead or threatening. Visitors came and went through dozens of passages. Species that had never spoken to each other before shared knowledge in the great libraries. The gardens that had once belonged only to humanity were now open to anyone who wanted to walk among the flowers. She found Elias Vance in the memorial gardens, tending to the monuments as he had done when she first saw this place. More stones had been added in the past year. The Vathari had provided the names of every species they had consumed, and humanity was carving each one into the record. High Arbiter, Elias said, looking up from his work. Or should I say, former High Arbiter. Just Thesson now. I gave up the title. Why? She walked among the monuments, reading names in languages she could not pronounce. Because I could not lead my people the way they wanted to be led. They wanted me to use my authority to force changes, to impose the rule on them, whether they accepted it or not. I refused. Elias set down his tools and stood to face her. That must have been difficult. It was, and it may have been wrong. Many of my people are angry. Some are calling for war against species that have rejected the new alliances. If I had stayed, if I had used my power to prevent it, you would have become exactly what you were trying to oppose. Thassan nodded slowly. That is what I told myself. But it is a cold comfort when I see the suffering that might have been prevented. They walked together through the gardens in silence. The artificial sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that no natural star could produce. Somewhere in the distance, children were laughing. I have a question, Thesson said finally, one that has been troubling me since the day we first met. Ask. You could have stopped us, my people, the Kirvani. 40 generations ago, we conquered 12 star systems. We destroyed 3 species completely. You knew. Why did you not intervene? Elias did not answer immediately. He walked to a monument bearing symbols from one of those destroyed species and placed his hand on the stone. Because you stopped, he said quietly, on your own, without anyone forcing you. 40 generations ago, the Kirvani looked at what they had become and made a different choice. You built the Concordat. You reached out to former enemies. You tried to become something better. It was not enough. Species still died because of what we did. Yes, but the change was real. If we had intervened, if we had stopped you through force, would the change have been genuine? Or would you have simply waited until the threat passed and then resumed your old ways? Thassan thought about this for a long time. She remembered the history she had learned as a child. The way her people spoke about the great turning with such pride. It had been their choice, their growth, their moment of becoming something new. You are saying that the struggle matters, that we had to choose for ourselves. I am saying that growth only comes from within. We can offer help. We can show other paths, but we cannot make the decision for anyone. Each species, each individual must choose what they will become. Even if they choose wrong, even then, Elias turned to face her. Freedom is not freedom if it only allows the choices we approve of. The galaxy must be free to fail if it is ever to be free to succeed. They reached the edge of the gardens, where a transparent wall looked out into the vastness of space. Stars glittered in the darkness, some familiar and some strange. Thesson knew that somewhere out there, wars were being fought and suffering continued. The rule had not solved everything. It might never solve everything, but something had changed. What will you do now? Elias asked. Thesson considered her answer carefully. I will return to my people, not as a leader, but as a teacher. I will share what I have learned and hope that some of them choose to listen, and I will wait. Wait for what? For the moment when they are ready. Maybe it will take generations. Maybe I will not live to see it. But I believe that the Kirvani can become something better. Not because anyone forces them, but because they choose it themselves. Elias smiled. It was the same gentle expression she remembered from their first meeting. Patient and kind, and somehow ancient. That is the hardest part of the rule, he said. The waiting. We spent 10,000 years watching the galaxy, seeing all the pain and all the mistakes, knowing we could end it if we chose. But we waited, because we believed that someday someone would understand. He gestured at the stars beyond the wall. You are not alone in understanding. Others are learning. The Vithari are teaching what they have discovered about regret and redemption. Young species are asking questions their elders never asked. The galaxy is changing slowly, in ways that cannot be seen from day to day. But the change is real. The sand looked at the stars and tried to imagine what the galaxy might become in another 10,000 years. She could not picture it. The future was too vast, too full of possibilities, both wonderful and terrible. But she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Not the kind of hope that demands certainty, not the kind that requires guarantees, the kind of hope that chooses to believe in something better, even when the evidence is incomplete, the kind that plants seeds without knowing if they will ever grow. I understand now, she said. The rule is not a law. It is not something you follow because you must. It is something you choose because of who you want to be. Elias nodded. That is exactly right. Power is not the ability to destroy or control. True power is the capacity to help, to heal, to wait, to trust others with their own futures. Anyone can learn to fight. The rule asks something harder. It asks us to learn when not to fight. The sun turned away from the stars and began the long walk back through the gardens. She passed monuments to species she had never known. Species that had lived and died while humanity waited in silence. She passed humans and aliens walking together, sharing stories and discoveries. She passed children playing games whose rules crossed cultural boundaries. The galaxy was broken in many ways. Wars continued, suffering continued. Species still made choices that led to destruction and pain. But here and there, in small pockets scattered across the stars, something new was growing. A different kind of strength, a different kind of power. The power to choose mercy when vengeance was possible. The power to wait when action was tempting. The power to trust others with their own growth. It would take time, generations, perhaps longer. But Thesson believed now that it was possible. She carried the rule with her as she left the sphere and returned to her people. Not a weapon. Not a command, just an idea. The hardest kind of idea, because it asked those who heard it to change themselves. But it was spreading, and someday the galaxy would finally understand.